Yeah, some days I feel unfazed, like when I'm with my friends with a cup raised. And on Monday, I got a gun raised, suicidal to a die until hump day. Then I go right back at it like an automatic. More drinks, more songs, more beats to rap. I need a shrink, I'm gone, more time keeps passing. No watch, no thoughts at all, just a hat, new era. Rep my P's and those O's, need the Phillies with the orange and black to feel home. From Citizens Bank back to Camden Yards, it's a tale of two cities, and trust we go hard. Trust we go hard, yes we go hard. You said we go hard, I said we go hard. Rockin' my Bob Cousy, stocking up on the loose. The lyrics come easy, but the life is a doozy. And yes, I'm choosy, and no, I won't settle, but I still take pop off over that kettle, cause I'm talking bigger picture. And yes, I'm gonna hit you with the...
Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Let's go, it works. Alright, so basically it's been a while since I last uploaded on this channel, but it's whatever. And you guys are basically here for what again? Oh yeah, the Tamaranian what if. So basically what ends up happening is that it's Zuku's first day at UA. And oh, by the way, in terms of his like Tamaranian name, his like true name or anything along those lines, I have no idea. You guys come up with it in the comments, but let's just get on with it. So yeah, basically what ended up happening is that it would be Zuku's first day at UA, and honestly it wouldn't be all that special for him at first. When Zuku first entered the classroom, almost everyone would just stop mid-conversation and just simply stare at him. Almost everyone actually stares at him because they heard the rumors about what he did at the entrance exam. That sort of information kinda terrifies them. They're wondering just how strong he is. Bakugo would look over to Izuku's direction, and he would be interested in Izuku, but for a different reason. He wanted to fight Izuku since he was supposed to be first place, but this kid just had to roll in and steal first place from underneath the rug. Yeah. Or however that phrase goes. Shoot, I don't remember. Anyways, Izuku would just wait with a bit of a sweat drop forming. He would have felt extremely awkward with all of these people staring at him. Oh, Choco wouldn't have appeared right behind Izuku. She would have tapped him, and Izuku would have actually immediately turned around to see who that was. When he saw that it was Ochako, he relaxed. The girl simply thanked him for saving her back at the entrance exam, you know, from that giant robot. She even mentioned how he was able to just take down a robot so easily too. She even started making some movements in order to demonstrate how Izuku did it. This would have ended up validating all other rumors, and people were trying to group around Izuku now, wanting to know just how strong he was. Aizawa would have walked in at this time, and he was now completely annoyed. He ordered for everyone to go outside and put their PE uniforms on, also mentioning how it was taking too long for them to actually quiet down. What made things even worse was with the fact that they all got out of their seats as well. This was going to be an annoying class to deal with. When outside, Aizawa would have brought up how they would be doing a quick apprehension test. Ochako would have mentioned the whole thing about, ceremony for the students that just made it into UA. Aizawa would have simply said to not bother with any of that because of the fact that time was precious. They already wasted a lot of that time in class simply talking to each other. He would have thrown the ball over to Izuku and told him to throw it using his quirk. Izuku would have listened and chucked the ball, which would have ended up getting to reach a good kilometer. He wasn't using his full strength here, but just enough at this point. Everyone would have been excited to see this. They were now pumped to actually partake in this exam until somebody decided to ruin it by saying how it seemed to be fun. Aizawa looked over to that student and immediately called him out on that. Fun, you say? Alright, if this seems to be so fun, why don't we add a bit of a threat? How about this? The person to reach last place here gets expelled from UA. A lot of the students would have been in uproar hearing this, trying to mention how that was unfair, until Aizawa mentioned how life was unfair. Do you really think that somebody's going to be holding your hand all your life, especially when you become a hero? They would have simply become silent at that point, knowing that Aizawa was right, although they hated to admit it. Izuku would have been one of the people to definitely not want to be in last place, especially with the reputation he has here. Izuku would end up pretty much surpassing everyone throughout most of the exams except for the side-to-side jump test and 50-meter dash. When it came on to the 50-meter dash, it was only because Izuku didn't want to show off too much at first. Izuku, during the side-to-side jump test, it's simply that he couldn't really make up enough momentum compared to Mineta at that point. Izuku would have been the first place overall for most of the other exams though, and he would have ended up scoring first place. Bakugo would have been enraged but decided to hold it in for right now. He figured there was no point in actually trying to fight the kid for right now. All he did was get first place. He would show him his place later on if they ever got to fight each other in a battle. Aizawa would have kept to his word here and kicked out Mineta simply for the fact that he was in last place and didn't show much of anything that would have made him think of the boy as hero material. The boy didn't show much of any potential here. Momo was especially shocked to see that one of the students got expelled on the first day. She thought that Aizawa was simply bluffing at first, but no. Apparently they had to really watch out now because of what just happened here. Now they knew for certain that UA was not a game. It was something completely different. It was something to be very wary about, because if you slip up, you might just end up being the next one expelled. She didn't want to risk that. So now she was even more determined here. A lot of the students would be way more determined here than in canon to actually try and prove themselves. Now, for the battle training arc, this would be a very different arc. Aizawa would warn Hagakure Toru as well though, mentioning how he might expel her as well if she didn't show anything impressive in the next exercise. After all, she was only able to do slightly better than Mineta, which isn't saying much considering he was in 20th place. He got expelled. She was just an inch away from getting expelled as well, but he expected for her to do something impressive in the next exercise. Azuku would have felt bad for Toru, but he couldn't really do anything here. All that could really be focused on is himself. The next day, All Might would have arrived in his Silver Age costume, I believe. Azuku would have enjoyed All Might's energy, but considering his sister's status, he would have seen All Might quite a few times. He wouldn't have been as impressed as other kids considering how he grew up. He was always around heroes. All Might was no exception. Once All Might informed everyone of what they would be doing, all of the remaining students would go to suit up. Azuku would have ended up wearing something modeled after his sister's outfit here. It was meant to also show a bit of his heritage as well. He wore a purple jumpsuit with a silver utility belt, white gloves, and a pair of red and white combat boots. For reference, basically imagine Timberlands. Just more heavy duty, I guess you could say. Anyways, everything was made out of a pretty sturdy material, which was a little bit more on the costly side, but thanks to Starfire's influence, they were able to afford it. Well, I should be saying Starfire's career here. She is a number 2 hero after all, so everything went well. Everyone would just be looking at Azuku now. They would have found his suit to be pretty interesting, believing it to simply be a homage to his older sister. They weren't completely wrong, but there was just a little bit more meaning to the colors beyond his sister. Azuku wasn't going to tell them the real meaning though. Azuku would have ended up being paired up with Ochako, and they were the heroes of this exercise. They were paired up against Ida and Bakugo. Bakugo and Azuku, you see, they didn't really know each other here. They just knew each other's names at this point. That was pretty much it. They never had any sort of relationship beyond that. Bakugo just wanted to fight Azuku, but not to the same extent as in canon. All he saw here was that Azuku was a stepping stone, or at least he believed Azuku to be a stepping stone. He was a protagonist of this story. This was his life story. Nobody ever said that UA was going to be easy, but he felt that he could still take on Azuku. Azuku would have offered to just fly himself and Uraraka up to the top window, figuring that the bomb would be on the top floor. If not, they could just go down from there. The villains might also be at the top as well, so they could even fight the villains, take them down, and then, apprehend them, I guess you could say. Basically, put a capture tape around them, and basically that would represent the villain's defeat. Ochako would have been all up for that, and would begin blushing on their way up, considering how close to each other they were. Once Izuku opened the window and entered though, he would have immediately been hit with a wave of explosions. Izuku would throw Chaco over to the side while he took the explosions head on. Although the explosions hurt, it wasn't necessarily anything he could not handle. He pushed forward and Bakugo would begin to yell. Bakugo was talking stuff about how he was going to win this exercise, show who was really the top dog here, but Izuku would just look over to the bomb and see Ida standing there protecting it. Izuku would have charged forward and crammed onto Bakugo's gauntlets, breaking them. Izuku would have kicked Bakugo in the chest before sucker punching him. Izuku would have already figured out that those gauntlets may have been an issue, but this would have infuriated Bakugo since he never even had a chance to build up any sweat. And Bakugo would have tried getting up, but Izuku would have drop kicked him. This would have just thrown Bakugo over to one of the walls, knocking him out unconscious. Izuku would have flown over to Ida, kicking him in the chest as well. Izuku would have also uppercut Ida and basically flick him to the side as well, knocking him out unconscious. Izuku would have touched the bomb and won, but Ida would have been bleeding. Ida would have been bleeding. When it came onto Bakugo, he was also bleeding from his left temple and the back of his head. People would have cringed seeing this, and although it wasn't necessarily a lot of blood that was leaking out, the fact that they were bleeding in the first place concerned many of the students. People would mention that Izuku could have went a little easier on the two, finding that he was able to do the job in, well, yes, a quick manner. It seemed that he didn't necessarily have his strength regulated for those two. He needed to manage his strength more. Momo would have been by herself and lost her competition, although she did try her best. People would have been silent when they saw Todoroki's performance. Toru would have been at the biggest disadvantage here, considering her quake only turned her invisible. People would have felt sorry for Toru, knowing what was going to happen next. The next day, Aizawa would have informed everyone about how they did in their battle trials. Aizawa would have looked over to Toru, and Aizawa would have actually shown her a little bit of mercy. He would have explained that while she was no longer allowed to continue to be in Class 1A, she could actually stay in UA as part of the general course, considering the fact that she was facing against an opponent that she was absolutely no match for. The boy literally froze the whole building, for crying out loud, and he was the son of the number 3 hero in Endeavor. Although disheartened, Toru accepted her fate. With that out of the way, they would have actually been informed of another thing that was going to be happening. The students would have been scared, thinking that even more than one end up having a risk of getting expelled, but they would relax when Aizawa explained that all they were really going to be doing is, well, picking a class president. As soon as he heard that, many of these kids would have been cheering, saying that hey, they wanted to be class rep. Somebody choose them as class rep, trying to make all these arguments for why they should be class rep. but Aizawa would have silenced them, explaining that they should figure out what they should do. In order to get a decision on who was going to be their class rep. But while that was going on, he was going to sleep. The students just sweat dropped looking at Aizawa in his sleeping bag. Ida would have been the very first person to actually suggest a generally decent idea on who was going to be the class rep here. And this would have been sort of democracy sort of thing. People would vote for who was going to be the class rep. And of course, in this timeline, not many people would have actually voted for Izuku, considering how it seemed that he was to be on the more violent side when it came on to yesterday with their performances in the battle trials. People were more wary of Izuku, although they were still willing to give him a chance, just not as class rep. Instead, Momo would have actually become class rep here. And people would have respected the fact that Momo was able to handle herself in a 2v1 competition. The odds were set against her and she still tried her best. And she was faced against the worst odds, but she still tried her best. That's something that they respected, and they wanted to have that sort of person as their class rep. Shoto would have become vice rep here because some people were also impressed by his performance, since he didn't directly harm anyone and he was able to reach the bomb in a timely manner. During lunch, everyone would just be talking about Izuku's performance and Toru's removal from Class 1A. Yeah, it was a bummer, but they had to move on. This was UA after all. They would have continued to just be conversing with each other, and Izuku would have even admitted to, being more rough than he should have been. But while this happened, all of a sudden the alarm went off. Everyone began to flee the cafeteria, but Izuku would have flown up and looked through one of the windows, only to find that it was a press. He informed everyone of it all just being a press who somehow made their way onto UA grounds. The crowd would have calmed down and even looked out the windows just to make sure that Izuku was telling the truth, that he was valid. Once they could validate Izuku's statement, they would have ended up walking back to their classes in a timely manner. When everyone is back in class, they would have ended up being informed about how they were going to be doing some practice in an area outside of their school. While on the bus ride there, the students would ask Izuku about his and his sister's quirks. Izuku would have made up a lie that he and his sister rehearsed over the years, explaining how he just had a pretty strong energy manipulation quirk. He could use it in various ways, such as flight and energy blasts from different parts of his body. But with this sort of quirk, it also burned a lot of calories, so he had to consume a lot more calories than the average person in order to make up for the energy usage. They would have accepted the explanation and they would have made their way over to the USJ. Izuku would end up hearing from 13 about how the quirks could be dangerous. He would have had a heart-to-heart about that fact, remembering just how brutal he was to Bakugo and Ida during their, well, battle trials, their quick assessment of the sorts. Well, against each other, basically experiencing how to use their quirks in combat. But after that, all of a sudden, villains would appear out of this black and purple portal. People wouldn't have at first thought that, oh, well, more specifically, Kirishima would have thought that these were just some fake villains that the USJ brought in, that UA brought in, wondering just how big UA's budget was. But Aizawa would have been confused about this statement. He would have turned around and realized that no, these weren't fake villains. No, these were real villains. He would have immediately told everyone to get behind him, but Azuku would have been rebellious here. Azuku would have immediately charged in to stop them from harming his classmates. Aizawa tried to call off Azuku, but it was no use. He would have even tried using his quirk on Azuku, but for some reason it wasn't working. What was this? He needed to have a talk about this later. He was gonna have a talk about this later. No, this could not be. He had an emitter quirk. That's what it showed on the documents. There was no way that he just shouldn't be able to not erase. There shouldn't be something for him to. Actually, let me rephrase this. There's no way that he should not be able to erase Azuku's quirk. He should have been able to erase Azuku's quirk right then and there, make him fall down, bust his head or something. But no, he was still flying in. Azuku would have fought his hardest and taken down quite a few of the villains, but Kurogiri would have immediately teleported Azuku to a different part of the USJ afterwards. Finding that enough was enough, this kid was taking down too many of their men so easily. All the rest of the students would have been teleported away as well, but Azuku, he wasn't in the flood zone here. Instead, Azuku would have found himself in the conflagration zone. Kurogiri was hoping to overheat Azuku while there, but the heat only took some adjusting. He got over the effects soon enough, and he would just fight through many of the villains there, knocking them out. He took too long though. It took too long for Azuku to defeat his roster of villains. Tsuyu would have been the only one on the boat here. She was unable to do anything, and she ended up getting killed by the villains here. Azuku would have broke out of the conflagration zone and started speeding around the USJ, trying to help as many of his classmates as possible until he heard, well, somebody screaming for help. But by the time he reached there, it was already too late. He would have made it to the flood zone and saw the dead body of Tsuyu. It was cut in half. Her blood was leaking all over the water, all over that big body of water. Azuku, tears started to form. He could not believe this. He was livid. He was angry here. He screamed in torment, seeing what just happened to one of his classmates. They were dead, all because he wasn't able to reach there in time. He would have screamed and killed all of the villains that were in the flood zone. Blood was all over his hands right now. His gloves would have been soaked red. He did not stop there. Shigaraki would have seen Azuku and had this Nomu go after him, since he was killing way too many of their men. The Nomu would have charged at Azuku, but Azuku would have just, well, here's what happened. The Nomu charged at Azuku. They tried to grab Azuku, but while Azuku was in this state, he was showing absolutely no mercy. He would have ripped off the Nomu's arm while it was trying to choke him. He beat the Nomu with its own arm. The Nomu screamed, but Azuku sent eye beams towards the exposed brain. The Nomu regenerated, but Azuku wasn't done. Tears were flowing through his eyes right now as he continued to tear at the Nomu's body. He ripped it to shreds over and over again. Shigaraki was getting enraged. He was scratching his neck as well. Irritated, he could not believe this. How was this happening? Seeing that the thing meant to defeat All Might was getting beaten by a mere child. How? How could this be? Thankfully, they had another ace up their sleeve. He charged at Azuku himself, hoping to decay their body, but Azuku grabbed his wrist, crushing it. Shigaraki screamed in pain as well now. He was about to kill Shigaraki until somebody blasted him in the back. Azuku screamed. He would have shrieked in agony, but he would have flung Shigaraki to the side. He was left in shock, since he was not used to feeling this sort of pain. He focused on his new opponent, but was left confused just a second later when he saw the person. At first, Azuku thought it was Starfire, but there were some noticeable differences. The biggest difference was that this woman had black hair with purple streaks, purple eyes, and full body armor. She seemed familiar for some reason, but you couldn't tell from where. Well, the skin tone seemed to give a hint as to where, but considering the society that they were living in, that could be a stretch. When she spoke, his eyes widened. All this girl really said though was, well, hello baby brother. And that's how we're going to end it for right now. It is your boy KingTitanX signing out. You guys already know what to do. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace out.